Previously on the Originals, to save Hope, Vincent discovered a way to permanently trap the hollow. However, once the ritual is complete, Hope must be kept away from the Mikaelson family to prevent the hollow's fragments from coming back together. Haley sat in the middle of the ritual circle, holding her daughter. At Vincent's signal, the four Mikaelson siblings stood at the four corners of the ritual circle. In this moment, even Vincent was visibly moved.
I just want to say that what you guys are doing here today is going to go a long way towards setting things right in this city.
He expressed his gratitude on behalf of the city to the Mikaelson siblings. He gestured for Freya to stand beside him, and together they began chanting the spell. This would be the last time the four Mikaelson siblings would gather together. As the spell began, a fierce wind suddenly arose. An immense magical energy surged through the air. At Vincent's signal, Haley unlocked the shackles on Hope's hands. A burst of blue light erupted, and Hope instantly awoke. The blue light coalesced in the air above and then divided, entering the chests of the four siblings. As the blue light gradually faded, the spell came to an end. Klaus looked at his daughter with concern, but Vincent urged them to leave quickly. Cole and Rebecca were the first to depart. Elijah takes one loving look at Haley and disappears. Klaus still wanted to ensure his daughter was safe. Hope slowly regained consciousness, looking at her father in confusion.
Hope, I love you.
Though it pained him greatly, Klaus had no choice but to leave. Hope called out to her father in sorrow. Elijah stood alone in the countryside, waiting for Marcel to arrive. This was the place where the Originals brothers first met Marcel. Marcel teased Elijah, saying he must be getting old to be feeling so nostalgic. The animosity between the two finally faded away. Elijah calmly asked Marcel for help.
I'm a danger to my family.
For 1,000 years, whenever Klaus needed him, Elijah would be there for his brother in an instant. But now he could no longer do so. This was a torment and punishment for Elijah, but Marcel didn't understand how he could be of any help.
You have to end this for me.
The two of them sought out Vincent, hoping that with his witchcraft, he could unlock Elijah's mind so that Marcel could hypnotize him, to prevent the hollow from tempting Elijah to reunite with his siblings. They could only stand inside the witchcraft circle. Vincent placed his hands on either side of Elijah's temples and began chanting the spell. With just a light touch of his fingers on the back of Elijah's head, the spell was complete. Marcel then began to hypnotize Elijah. Memories from 1,000 years flooded into Elijah's mind, and all the grudges, love, and hatred from those years flashed before his eyes. Under Marcel's command, everything Elijah had once held dear, his brothers, sisters, lovers, and cherished memories, was completely erased.
Let it go.
Marcel's command reached deep into Elijah's oldest memories, causing even the family vow he had once held sacred to disappear like dust in the wind. When Elijah came back to himself, his eyes were vacant, yet he felt a strange sense of relief. Rebecca was reluctant to leave for good. She handed a necklace, passed down through generations of their family, to Freya, asking her sister to give it to Hope. Freya said she would stay in New Orleans. This was where the hollow was born, and she could continue researching how to destroy it. Rebecca urged her sister to cherish the love she had with Keelan. The two sisters embraced each other tightly. Haley and Hope also packed up, preparing to leave the city. Freya gave the pendant to Hope, conveying Rebecca's love for her niece.
I love you. I love you too, Aunt Freya.
Haley wheeled her suitcase out and took one last, lingering look at the house, reluctantly saying goodbye to Freya. As night fell, Rebecca stood alone on the busy streets of New York, only to be stopped by Marcel, who told her that they hadn't even said goodbye. Sophia had already left. Rebecca said she had no interest in being anyone's second choice, but Marcel explained that he had willingly ended things with Sophia. Both he and Rebecca were now free, and nothing could stand in their way anymore. Rebecca smiled, contented. Cole hypnotized a master jeweler, instructing him to craft a necklace, earrings, and an enormous engagement ring from a diamond the size of an egg. He and his beloved Davina had finally made their relationship official. Haley and her daughter Hope returned to Mystic Falls. Hope enrolled in the school run by Alaric and Caroline. Hope and Caroline's twin daughters became close friends. Elijah finally shed his signature suit and became an ordinary pianist. Though his life was simple, it brought him peace and happiness. Klaus watched his brother with lingering affection, sensing his gaze. Elijah turned and looked back at Klaus. The two brothers looked at each other, but Elijah just nodded his head without knowing why. Klaus smiled with satisfaction and then left, leaving Elijah to immerse himself in the world of music. For the safety of his family, Elijah gave up 1,000 years of memories. He did not know his name, nor did he realize that the hunger gnawing at him could only be satisfied by human blood. He stood bewildered in front of a vending machine outside a grocery store. The man who once wore a $90,000 suit now couldn't find a single coin in his pocket. Helpless, he tapped on the glass door, accidentally smashing a hole in the vending machine. He eagerly grabbed a bag of food, tore it open, and began eating, but this kind of food wouldn't satisfy the needs of an original vampire's body. Elijah fell into deep thought. A store clerk soon offered a reasonable explanation for his confusion. The warmth of the man's throat made Elijah's hunger surge, and he instinctively took a small taste. The flavor of the blood exceeded anything he could have imagined. The man fled in terror, but for the amnesiac Elijah, the door to exploring this new world had been flung wide open. He mercilessly seized his prey. Elijah commandeered the clerk's clothes, removing his own expensive suit and tie. The monogrammed cuff with the letter E and an ancient ring on his finger were now the only clues he had to his identity. The Jesus figurine in his pickup truck became his only companion at that moment. Destitute, Elijah got behind the wheel and drove away. With all his memories gone, how would he survive in this perilous world of supernatural beings? A week later, after finishing a hunt, Elijah suddenly heard a mysterious whisper. He hurriedly stood up, using his vampire hearing to locate the source of the sound. He quickly found a woman who was also feeding, but her technique was much more practiced and gentle than his.
I thought I was the only one.
The woman seemed to recognize the man before her, but Elijah, grasping at straws, doesn't realize it. He didn't know he was a vampire, didn't know why he needed blood, didn't know if there were others like him in the world. He desperately needed the woman to explain it all. Elijah's confused yet sincere expression softened the woman's heart. They went to a restaurant, where the woman explained the process of becoming a vampire to Elijah. She slowly guided him to embrace all the superhuman abilities that came with being a vampire: heightened senses, extraordinary smell and hearing, a strong body, and an endless life free from aging and death. The only drawback was that they couldn't walk in sunlight. Elijah mentioned that he walked in the sunlight every day. The woman pointed out the daylight ring on his hand. Only then did Elijah realize that the ring on his finger had protected him from being burned by the sun. The woman asked Elijah if he had any memories of dying, but he said all he could see in his mind was the image of a man. Though the face was unclear, Elijah couldn't even introduce himself to the woman, so he referred to himself as E. After the letter on his cufflink, the woman introduced herself as Antoinette. When the waitress brought the bill, Elijah calmly counted out his pile of coins. Antoinette silently pulls out a few bills and pays the bill. Elijah was touched and began to trust her a bit more. He took Antoinette to where he was staying, a simple one-bedroom apartment with floral bedsheets and brick walls, a place that could only be described as impoverished. He hadn't even fed on anyone wealthy enough to carry a wallet. Antoinette remarked that he probably didn't know how to compel others. It was only then that Elijah realized vampires had the power to compel others. His every bewildered expression and naive remark made it all the more heartbreaking. The once mighty original vampire now resembled a complete novice. He showed her his suit and cufflinks. Antoinette found a note in that cardboard box, in some unknown hand, that simply said, "Don't look back." With Antoinette's help, Elijah learned how to compel humans, finally managing to add a few cheap personal items to his barren little apartment. The floral bedsheets clearly didn't suit his taste, so he quickly replaced them with a more minimalist set. Though he still couldn't afford a wallet, it was certainly more dignified than carrying a handful of coins. He happily listened to classical music when suddenly there was a knock at the door. He quickly put on the only decent leather jacket he owned and, with a mix of excitement and nervousness, opened the door. Like a love-struck teenager, Elijah proudly showed Antoinette the newly decorated apartment, and told her that he had prepared a surprise to thank her for all the care she had shown him. He's a gentleman and says he'll have Antoinette home by midnight, but Antoinette says she'd prefer something a little wilder, so they ended up in a bar, letting loose to the music. For the first time in ages, Elijah flashed a genuine smile. He forgot all about his family ties, and even Haley, finding a new lease on life in the sultry dance of the seductive female vampire. Suddenly, the DJ let out a shout, and the rowdy bar turned into a scene of utter chaos. Vampires began feasting on their dance partners. Elijah was thrilled, proudly showing Antoinette his new discovery. He thought Antoinette would be happy to see so many of their kind, but he didn't realize that the vampire world was often rife with violence. Vampires with daylight rings looked down on Antoinette for not having one, and Antoinette's refined nature didn't allow her to enjoy such brutal and cruel hunting. The goddess hurriedly left, and even the most oblivious person would realize that this date had gone horribly wrong. Elijah followed Antoinette outside, where she casually shared a traditional French delicacy with him. Elijah asked what he had done wrong. Antoinette said she didn't like communal feeding and was often threatened by vampires with daylight rings, who said they would tie her under the sun and burn her alive. Elijah sincerely apologized to her. They chose a different way to spend their date, taking a stroll under the gentle moonlight. Antoinette shared her story. She had once been tied to a post and stoned to death, but the vampire family that turned her was just as full of bloodshed and violence, so she went to great lengths to run away. She constantly reminded herself not to be seduced by violence. She didn't like walking in the sunlight with a daylight ring, pretending to be a normal person, so she took off the ring. She urged Elijah to accept who he was now, telling him not to dwell on the memories he had lost. She believed that the fear humans felt before death ruined the taste of their blood, so she always insisted on hunting in a more humane way.
I've never tasted that fear.
Antoinette then pointed out that Elijah had been drinking the blood of those consumed by fear. She grabbed an innocent boy who was passing by and demonstrated her own method of hunting, inviting Elijah to taste blood that hadn't been tainted by fear. Curious, Elijah leaned in and took a sip. The blood's flavor far exceeded his expectations, and he immersed himself in it, smiling contentedly as he nestled beside Antoinette. They continued walking under the moonlight, chatting about Antoinette's experiences in France. Elijah was surprised to discover that he still knew how to speak French. A piano by the side of the path caught their attention. At Antoinette's invitation, Elijah sat down at the piano, placing his hands on top of hers, following her fingers as they moved across the keys. Then, to his astonishment, Elijah realized that he could still play the piano. They joyfully played together, but Elijah soon sensed something was off. He grabbed Antoinette's hand. It felt like someone was watching them. A shadow suddenly flashed by, slamming Elijah against a tree. Marcel called out Elijah's name, and Elijah looked at the man before him with utter confusion. Marcel had no time for introductions and forcefully demanded that Elijah leave immediately, but Elijah recognized him as the figure that had been haunting his mind. He was certain Marcel knew about his past. Antoinette, however, said this path was bound to be one of blood and danger, and she wasn't willing to step into the trap. But she didn't reveal that she knew Elijah's true identity. She reluctantly said goodbye to him. Elijah was marking some locations on a map. He was searching for a man he had met only once, a man who knew his name and his past, but Elijah couldn't find a single trace of him. Frustration and the mystery of his own identity left Elijah completely lost. The combat skills of an original vampire were unleashed in full force. Finally, after slaughtering an entire bar, the man appeared before him. Marcel scolded him for not following the note he had left. Don't look back. Leave this city. Clinging to the past would only end up hurting someone who was very important to him.
You did this for someone.
Under Marcel's persuasion, Elijah gave up the search. He traveled to the French city Antoinette had once told him about. His lover was playing the piano under the spotlight, and he realized that dwelling on the past would only bring endless pain. He finally let go of his obsession with the past and chose to return to Antoinette to spend their long lives together. For 7 years, they lived a warm and blissful life. 7 years later, the new season of the Originals story began. In New York, Marcel and Rebecca also enjoyed 7 wonderful years together, reaching a high point in their relationship. Marcel showed her the gifts he had prepared, starting with a wedding dress she had long desired, and the house plans he had personally designed for them, the fencing sword they had used in their youth, and an enormous engagement ring.
Rebecca Mikaelson, will you marry me?
The romantic proposal vows brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. Marcel then pulled out 2 envelopes. One represented acceptance, the other represented rejection, but Rebecca still seemed hesitant. Klaus missed his brother, so he traveled a great distance and appeared before Elijah, posing as a stranger. The moment the brothers met, the roses on the table instantly wilted. It was the first time in 7 years that Klaus had summoned the courage to speak to his brother. Meanwhile, in New York, Rebecca and Marcel had a heated argument. Rebecca hadn't accepted, nor had she rejected his proposal. The flowers beside the bathtub had all fallen to the floor, and Rebecca quickly realized that Klaus was up to something again. But in the next moment, the water in the tub turned into blood. Furious, Rebecca called Klaus, telling him she had just taken a bath in actual blood. Klaus looked back to see that the liquid in his wine glass had also turned into blood. Rebecca heard Elijah's voice.
How does it look?
Happy.
As the situation escalated, Klaus had no choice but to leave in a hurry. With the departure of the Mikaelson siblings, New Orleans had enjoyed 7 rare years of peace. Freya was still searching for the source of the Hollow's power. but her efforts had yielded little success. Vincent, Haley, and Josh each led the city's 3 factions: witches, vampires, and werewolves. Josh still occasionally sent texts to Marcel in New York to keep him updated on the situation. Haley had a new boyfriend, a human who worked as a chef in a bar. Declan sent Haley a dish and didn't miss the chance to flirt with her. Josh joked, "If you don't marry him soon, I just might," but a phone call abruptly ended their leisurely afternoon gathering. Pope had gotten into trouble at the magic school.